Hey guys, welcome to today's show. So I have a very special guest on, and she's a good friend of mine, and her name is Henneke Cook. Now, Henneke has a multitude of specialist skills and qualifications, and these include nursing, which also involved a course in tropical diseases, midwifery, and community development, and a ton of experience working with different people groups. And the one thing that really sticks out for me about Henneke in the time that I've known her is actually where she puts her security, because a lot of us kind of put it in the foundations of having like a physical home or a secure job which brings a stable income. But for Henneke, she's chosen to do things a little differently, which we're going to explore. And I think this really ties in beautifully into her bigger vision and her mission. So Henneke, thanks for being on and welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well, thank you. It's a bit early morning for me, but otherwise, yes, I'm good.
Well, you're looking great.
Thank you.
So would love to dive straight in, Henneke, and basically ask the first question, which is, what would be like briefly, what's like some of the significant events that you feel in your past that have really shaped you to become the Henneke that we know and love today?
There have been so many because obviously I've had a really long past, considering my age. But I think growing up overseas certainly had a big impact on me. My parents were development workers in Africa, and that's where I grew up. And also having one parent who's Dutch, one parent who's English. So growing up in a very multicultural environment shaped my love for languages, my love for other peoples. I think being a third culture kid, and there's books that have been written about this, and I haven't read many of them at all, but just being a third culture kid does influence your outlook on life, and I think your attitude towards travel, towards relationships, towards friendships. It can make you a bit of a nomad in all of those aspects, interestingly, not just in wanting to travel. I love travel, but I think it can affect you in in how with relationships you can go really deep, but you can be very much in the moment as well and move on reasonably easily from that. I have some friends from way back who I cherish deeply, but not many. Most of my good friends that I really go deep with tend to be in the place where I am at the time.
Wow. I mean, yeah. So I didn't actually know that. So one parent who's Dutch, excuse me, one parent who's Dutch, one parent who's English, and you were brought up in Africa. I said I'd actually never heard of that term, third culture child. So that's probably my ignorance showing up there.
Hey, third culture kid, read it up. You'll find it fascinating.
But I'd love to hear what that means for you then, and how that's really shaped you, like that experience. Well, what does that mean? What are the kind of challenges involved in that, and what are the positives?
I think the positives is that you can have a really broad worldview. I had a lot of exposure to different languages, so I've ended up loving languages. Although that's not a given because I have a sister who is really scientifically minded. She has a brilliant maths mind, and that's not me at all. But languages leave her cold. So it's not a given that everybody would enjoy languages. But I think for me, that was a great exposure. The comings and goings, saying goodbye from an early age has just been something that has become part of my life. So I actually get itchy feet when, after about 5 years or so, when I've been in a place, I start to feel a little bit like, oh, there might be something else going on somewhere else that I could get involved in. And I think that may be part of that early life where you're moving, you're traveling a lot, you're saying goodbye, and then when you come back, people have changed, and so you have to say hello to new people and you have to form new relationships. But that is also quite an interesting thing because you do meet lots of really interesting, fascinating people along the way. Saying goodbye just gets harder every time. It does not ever become easier. I think because you learn to form relationships better every time. If you're willing to give yourself, you can also just cut yourself off, I guess. But then it also means that each time you feel as if a part of you is going again when those relationships get more distance between them. I think it has really shaped my love of culture and trying to understand culture and how that influences people. And yeah, I think just recognizing how incredibly privileged we are in the West compared to so many other places in the world. And we at times can be totally oblivious to that and think that we are victims, and actually we're very privileged, and we don't always use that privilege very well. But it is also a huge privilege to walk with people who live on the edge of existence a lot of the time, the marginalised. You know, that really that edge where you're never quite sure whether tomorrow you may drop off it or not.
Yeah. I mean, even that is kind of strikes a chord, like people who live on the edge of existence. That's, you know, yeah, yeah. So, at which place then did you start to, or country, location did you start to really like solidify or hone, like, I don't know, education or the skills, like some of the things I mentioned in your introduction, nursing, midwifery, community development? Where did all that start? And
from birth, I think.
great.
My mother was a nurse and a midwife, and she used those skills in Africa. So I saw that. You know, as a kiddie, you dress up in your nurse's uniform and you help out, handing out tablets to people and stuff. And that, I think, instilled in me a love of caring for people who are sick and realizing that we have skills that can help in places where it might not have happened before. Dad was very much working in community development, although I think way back then we probably didn't call it that, but it was agriculture. It was building dams to collect water. It was teaching people how you could make the most of the short rainy season to grow plants that would then attract more rain and so on. And it was, I think it was just instilled in me that this is what you do. You build communities, you empower people, you build capacity in people. You see what can be done and say, hey, you've got all the skills. Here are some tools that might help you to just grow more. When I first started out in midwifery in North Africa myself, we didn't do an awful lot of that, but over the first few years, that love of wanting to do that, just wanting to leave something behind, but that makes it all about me, but also to say to people, listen, don't rely on us all the time. You've got it. You can do it yourself. You know, I want to train and I want to help and I want to grow the potential that I see here. And that is how I really got most interested in community development, which was quite a way down the line from childhood, but I think it was in there right from the beginning. And that's how I ended up doing that for 7 years, just trying to grow projects with people that you could leave behind and let carry on, you know.
Yeah.
It's not about me, it's about them.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a point where you can move away and nobody really misses you or your skills or all these things that you hold as very invaluable. And they're like, yeah, no, it's fine. We've got it.
Yeah. And that's really cool, Henneke, because you mentioned, in that you're trying to contribute to something in such a way where it's self-sustaining, right? These are where words like legacy come into play, where you're able to make that difference and that type of a contribution. It's equipping, it's empowering, as you said, and to be able to do that, like, there needs to be like a security in yourself, right? That you're okay with people not having to depend on you. You know, in fact, so your outlook is very much an external one, versus looking at you, or how do I make myself continue to be needed, for example.
I think the tendency is always there to want to be needed. I think we have that. We get a lot of our significance from the need to be needed. But actually that only feeds our insecurities in a way. So once you can look beyond that and you can start to say, listen, I'm actually not indispensable here. This is a community and we do things together, and I want to build something. I don't know about legacy, because that straight away makes it about me again. It's like, what did I leave behind? But it's more like, I want to build something that enables this community to stand strong and to flourish and to thrive, rather than making it all about me. I know some people who've worked overseas for many years. They get their MBEs and their ABEs and things, and I don't want that. There's absolutely nothing in me that wants recognition for what I've done, apart from maybe, God's recognition that I've been a faithful servant. But that does involve then doing what He has asked of me, rather than oh, this would be really cool and it would look good on my CV, and I'm gonna sound amazing if I do this particular thing. Yeah. So the need to be needed, I can't lie. I think everybody has that, and it does make us feel incredibly good when somebody says, "Oh, I need you," or "What you did really helped me. Thank you for being who you are." But at the same time, that can also be taken away very quickly. So the next day somebody can say, "Well, that wasn't helpful at all, what you just said to me," and that can make you feel very crushed if you don't have your security. If you have your security in your own skills and abilities and so on.
Exactly. And that's where you mentioned your faith in God, right? And then that's where the security lies. So it's not putting the security in yourself, which then can lead to the up and down moments, crushing moments, but also moments of elation, versus the security in God. So tell me more about that, Henneke. And was that always a very prominent part in your life? Or what point did it become so?
It was very present right from the beginning. My parents very, loved God very much, and all that they did was based on a desire to serve Him. I became kind of resentful towards that at one point when I had to stay behind in Holland to start secondary school, and they were going back to Africa without my older sister and myself. And at that point, I wasn't too impressed with God, because He took them away from me. However, it was also in that time that I then really met with God in a very real way and made the decision myself to become a follower of Jesus. It was probably based a little bit on fear that I would be separated from my parents forever if we should die apart. But over the years, that just grew more into a real sense of walking with Him and letting Him lead my life. And that very much led into doing nursing and midwifery and further training, some theological training, cross-cultural training, as well as knowing that He was leading me to North Africa. I had a wonderful time in the first country that I lived in, absolutely loved it, but at the same time, it perhaps was also the most difficult time of my life. And it was at the end of that I, in going through some prayer retreats to try and find some balance again in my life, and to understand the situation I'd come out of, and the fact that I was pretty much burnt out, that I really I basically was slammed up against the grace of God. I had never experienced it or known it in such a incredibly personal way. I'd spoken to people about it. I'd helped other people kind of find that place where they were living in this relationship of grace. But for me, that was the first time that I really understood that I am loved by God, not just everybody else, but that significance in him comes because he considers me worth loving and dying for. And that was perhaps the biggest turning point in my life. But that was late 30s, So oh my goodness, that was a long journey. But I think you have to go through some stuff where pretty much everything is stripped away and you can only rely on God. And that's when he says, but I'm here, right? It's not just I turned up, I've been here all the time. And I'm just allowing you to really see that I am your only sustenance, the only one who really will be here all the time.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Henneke. And as you're sharing, I can hear that it was such a powerful moment for you, such a pivotal, like, transformational point in your life. And so that kind of breakthrough, that realization came after, you said, was it that the most difficult part in your life? And breakthrough after the breakdown, if you like, and just nothing left. I mean, that phrase, great phrase, slammed up against the grace of God. That's a beautiful phrase there.
It sounds scary. And I have to say it was in a way quite, I don't know if it was scary, but it was awesome. We overuse that word these days because there really was, I was completely in awe of what happened. And recognizing just the incredible greatness of God, but also that incredible nearness at the same time it was awe-inspiring.
So that shift then, at that point, what changed after that? How did your path change and unfold from that point onwards?
It took a while, but then it involved learning some more Arabic, actually taking a year out to study Arabic full time. And then I thought I would stay and be very comfortable in the situation that I was in the Middle East at the time. And God said, no, I want to take you to a more difficult place, which I couldn't get into, interestingly. The country I wanted to go to was really hard to get into at the time. So I thought I'd wait for a couple of years, learning more about community development and learning again more about grace and about living in a broken world, learning about relationships that don't always work out. We can strive to be at peace with everyone. We can strive to want the best in our relationships, and sometimes it just doesn't work.
How do you deal with that, actually, Henneke? That's, that point where, we strive to have peace with everyone. We strive for the best relationships.
I think forgiveness is the main word there. If a relationship doesn't work out, it usually is both sides that are not getting each other. And you don't just extend forgiveness, but you ask for it as well. You seek it, please forgive me. However, you cannot force people into a place where they will trust you or where they will forgive you. And then you have to just realize that you can't force people's stories on them. What really matters is that you are in the right place with God. And so in a couple of these situations, I had to say, I've done all I can humanly do. I have asked for forgiveness. I have forgiven. And that is all that I can do. I can't grab somebody by the throat and say, you have to forgive me. You have to be my best friend. That's not how it goes. But then also leaving it with God, really just being able to walk away and leaving it with God and saying, I can be free because I have done all I can do. And there will always be regrets, I think, but no being bound in bitterness or anger or frustration.
Yeah.
You have to let it go.
Yeah. That's so important, isn't it? That
Mm-hmm.
letting it go, because otherwise all that, I'll put it in one word, it's like the baggage, you just end up carrying it along with you. And it affects the way you do other things, because it's always there niggling at you.
Yeah.
And it could be a small thing, it could be a big thing, it could be lots of little things, but over time that weight grows heavier.
And it really, yeah, and it's forgiveness,
Mm.
just like brushing it off in the, I hate the film Frozen because, Elsa's like, let it go. Not, it's not like that. It's literally do everything you possibly can,
Mm.
but then make sure that you're in the right place with God as much as you can with that person, and then you have to move on. Yeah.
It's good. Won't we repeat that phrase you just said about the film? People might have alienated a load of kids and millions of people.
I'm sorry, I like some other Disney films.
It's great. So, I mean, so Arabic, and you did some more training, acquired some more skills, and then eventually, where did the doors open for you?
I worked with refugees. I was in North Africa during the Arab Spring, and we had the incredible privilege of working with a refugee population who were running away from the horrors of war, and that just grabbed my heart. Saw God at work, saw him do incredible miracles. One of the stories was just amazing. We were working with the National Army, and they asked us to cook a meal for a few hundred people who they were expecting to be in camp that night. And we had a small team, trying to remember how many we had at the time, not more than 12. A few hundred, yeah, we can handle that. So we had these massive cooking pots, worked to cook a hot meal for these people who'd been traveling, had been detained at the border, were going to be sleeping under canvas that night. And then the floodgates just opened, and more and more and more people came in. And we had 3,000 people in the camp,
Wow.
cooked for a few hundred.
Wow.
And we did not know what to do. So we prayed, and some people kept praying, and some people took smaller pots that they could carry to the lines of the people who'd come across the border, and just started ladling it out. Everybody got a big ladle full of food in their bowl, and then they would come back with their pot and say, we need to fill up again, and off they went again. This kept going and going and going, and the food never ran out until everybody
Wow.
did. And it literally was the feeding of the 5,000 in front of our eyes, and God was so incredibly faithful. He also calmed down a riot in the camp that we thought would be very dangerous. And we prayed, and the calm came on the camp. And in fact, the leader of the army recognized that, and said, we saw God at work in you, because we recognized that you prayed, and that brought about the peace in the camp. And it's just incredible how, just in the midst of so much devastation and trauma and not knowing what we were doing. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing. None of us had really done this before, but just wanting to help those who'd lost everything just made me realize that, in the midst of that, people who know God and love God can bring so much hope. And that is what shaped my desire to be involved with refugees. I didn't think it would happen quite in the way that it has. But I think that's the thing about God. When you say, yeah, okay, use my life, he takes you along some very interesting twists at times. I eventually got into the country where I wanted to be. Had this wonderful idea of setting up a coffee shop to provide a safe space for women. And a year later, I was out of that country and couldn't get back in. And you're just like, God, what are you doing? I really don't understand. But that's how I ended up in Manchester. That's how I ended up being in a place where there are more refugees, learning more about refugees at this end of the scale, where they're coming to the country where they're going to settle, which has also been a really helpful learning curve. And then God brought back that dream of setting up a coffee shop, but combining it with some of the other things. So women and refugees and places where they are perhaps at their most vulnerable because it's their first landing place, and where they really need to be cared for and loved and given hope. And so, yes, that's the place where I'm at the moment, just starting up that project.
What a story! That the feeding of the 5,000 is like a real life
3,000, you know.
3,000. 3,000. I mean, but it's like the real life reenactment of a Bible story, like seeing it actually happen for real in front of your very eyes. And, you know, that's that's faith building for sure.
Yeah.
So, Henneke, it's like the way that you talked, and this is what I mean when I mentioned this in the introduction, that where you find your security, like the flexibility you have to almost be like, here I am, God, send me, and to be open to that. It requires, well, you can tell me, courage, like bravery, like acknowledging fears you might have, but stepping out anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how is that every time you kind of like feel, okay, I'm asking God to lead me, and oh, he is now and telling me to go somewhere. Like, what is that feeling, and how do you go through it? How do you process that?
Requires, I think there has to be a willingness to sacrifice, but then I grew up with the saying of C.T. Studd, who said, if Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice is too great for me to make for him. And it really is true, you know, in the light of what he sacrificed for us, anything that I give up really is nothing. And this in the light of eternity, this is a really short little life, you know. What's 100 years? Actually, I'm not hoping to live to 100, but what's 80 in the light of eternity? And also, yeah, you give up things, you know. I have sacrificed certain things. You don't even realize that you're giving it up at the time, but you know, there is a joy in singleness. I've really embraced that in the last year or so. But you go through the whole thing of no marriage, no children. This wasn't what I had expected, but actually, this is what has happened with my life. And yes, I mean, people will say that's too big a cost, but actually, who's to say that God would have had that as a plan for my life anyway? Being single, the flexibility is so much easier. My time is so much easier to fit around what God wants rather than other people's needs. You give up other things, but God, you know, Jesus promised in this life, if you give up father, mother, brother, sisters, homes, and so on, you will receive 100-fold in this life and the next. And I think people think about the next life, but in this life, it's true. I have been taken into families. I have had people taking care of me in a way that a father or mother would. I have brothers and sisters across the world, who I would have never met if I just stayed safely in England. I'm getting more and more frustrated in the NHS. You know, I love the NHS, by the way, but I'm sad about the situation it's in at the moment. But that, what you get in the place for that is so incredible. And I think you need courage. I actually think that when we step out, when we dare to step out, even when we don't have an awful lot of courage, we discover that the courage comes along the way. Because it's not my courage, really. It's in His strength. It's God's courage. And so the more you say, okay, I need a bit more of that courage today, the more He gives it. So I'm not a particularly courageous person. I perhaps seem fearless at times, but I can get scared. But there's always that, no, but if God has asked me to do this, He'll give me the things that I need to do it.
That's really good. Just that, and thank you for sharing, Henneke. It's thank you. That story is going to inspire and encourage others, and it's encouraging me now. That point about not necessarily having the courage before you step out and do something, I like that. It's like you can be fearful and you can still be obedient. You can be fearful and still take that action. Like they're separate. The emotion you feel isn't necessarily the justification for the action you take next.
Yeah.
And
I think it's a little bit like bungee jumping. Now, that's one thing that scares me silly, so I've never done it. I've never done it, and I'm pretty sure that pretty much everybody who stands there at that moment before they step out into the void is absolutely wetting themselves. But then what you get afterwards is that total exhilaration of, hey, the rope held. And I think that that's what it is with God. You're on the edge, you're saying, this is scaring me. But then when you step out and you do it, the exhilaration of God's got me and He's making it happen, is what gives you then the wings to fly, I guess. So yeah, I'm not going to be bungee jumping because I don't think it's a necessary skill. But I get that every time I go scuba diving, for example. Just as I step off the boat into the water, I'm like, yeah, no, this is why I do it. It's because it's thrilling, and I think a life of adventure with God is scary, but it's thrilling as well.
yeah, and you're definitely saying that because you're living that adventure right now.
Yes. Yeah. This may be the biggest challenge I've ever done.
That's great. So, Hannah, thank you so much for your time. I just want to leave with one final question.
Okay.
I'm really interested in this one. How do you intend to increase your impact going forward?
My impact
Mm.
on whom?
Who's on your mind?
I think, surprisingly, I find myself in a place where I care very deeply about women who are affected by their life situations. So women who are traumatized, not just um, by war and not just by the culture that they're in, but just by being women, being victimized, having less opportunities, being told constantly that they are worthless, that they are worthless and worthless, both of them. And I say I'm surprised by that because I've never been a girly girl, but I've just started to realize how incredibly beautiful women's lives can be when they are complete in God, and how much God loves women, values them and gives them that place of saying, you are my child, as much as the men are. And how I want to increase that impact really is by bringing more women alongside who have that same feeling and giving them the tools to be able to impact other women. I don't see myself as the savior of the world or the savior of even one particular person, but to say to a woman, I want to equip you with whatever you need to be able to go and influence others. I want to equip you to equip others. I want to stand alongside you and strengthen you in whatever way I can to then have that impact on others. It doesn't have to be about me, but it's about seeing the value in people, and in my case, in women in particular, to say your life should not be wasted. Your life needs to be used for the good of others. And one of the reasons for the name of the project, which is the Hefzibah project, is because the name Hefzibah means my delight is in her. And I really believe that God delights in women. And I just want to let people know who, like me, did not know that, to actually come to that realization.
That's good. Thank you so much, Henneke. Your openness, the vulnerability in your sharing. It's so apparent that what has driven your decisions, what has driven you is that pivotal point where you really felt the presence of God, and when you made that decision to be led by Him. And not every decision you made to follow from that point onwards was comfortable, but you kind of put your needs secondary, to the bigger thing, to what God was calling you to. And it's an all-embracing type thing. It's a full commitment into that, and that's the sense of adventure. I mean, there's so much uncertainty that potentially comes from that, and yet you're still doing it and you're still following. And I love that. And just thank you.
Well, it's because He's worth it. He is totally worth it. It's not my doing. There have been times when I've been very ready to give it up, but He is so totally worth it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So
making me cry early in the morning.
I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and maybe should we hang out and go watch Frozen 2 together when that releases?
No desire to do so, thank you.
Great. Well, we'll see each other soon, but thank you so much for your time today, Henneke.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.